The beginning of literary movements, a detailed analysis. What is a literary movement? Key factors behind the birth of literary movements. The role of key figures and manifestos. The evolution of early literary movements, interplay between movements. The beginning of literary movements, a detailed analysis. Literary movements mark significant shifts in the themes, styles, and purposes of literature throughout history. They arise from social, political, and cultural changes and reflect the evolving perspectives of society. Understanding the beginnings of literary movements requires examining the context, triggers, and influence of key figures and works. What is a literary movement? A literary movement is a group of writers and artists who share similar ideals, themes, and stylistic choices. These movements often challenge existing norms and introduce fresh perspectives, reflecting the zeitgeist of their time. Movements can overlap, coexist, or react against each other, creating a dynamic literary landscape. Key factors behind the birth of literary movements. 1. Social and political change. Major social and political upheavals often inspire new literary movements. For instance, the Enlightenment, 17th to 18th centuries. Rooted in the Age of Reason, it emphasized logic, scientific inquiry, and individual rights. Romanticism, late 18th century. A reaction against the Industrial Revolution's dehumanizing effects and Enlightenment's rationalism, focusing on emotion, nature, and individualism. 2. Advances in technology and communication. The printing press, developed in the 15th century, revolutionized how literature was shared. Movable type allowed ideas to spread quickly, making literature accessible to broader audiences. For example, the Renaissance flourished partly because classical works were widely reprinted, inspiring writers to explore humanism. 3. Philosophical shifts. Philosophies often act as the backbone of literary movements. Existentialism influenced modernist and postmodernist works, emphasizing the individual's struggle to find meaning in an absurd world. Similarly, Marxism inspired realist and socialist literature, focusing on class struggle and social equity. 4. Cultural exchange and globalization. Colonial expansion and later globalization brought cultures into contact, inspiring cross-pollination of literary styles and themes. For example, the Harlem Renaissance, 1920s to 30s, blended African-American cultural identity with global artistic movements, producing groundbreaking poetry, music, and prose. The role of key figures and manifestos. Literary movements often coalesce around visionary figures who articulate their ideas through works and manifestos. Romanticism, William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge's lyrical ballads, 1798, marked a shift towards emotion and imagination, laying the foundation for romantic poetry. Modernism, T.S. Eliot's The Waste Land, 1922, and James Joyce's Ulysses showcased fragmented structures and experimental narratives, reflecting the disillusionment after World War I. Realism, authors like Gustave Flaubert, Madame Bovary, and Charles Dickens portrayed the struggles of ordinary people, challenging the idealized depictions of earlier literature. Manifestos like the Surrealist Manifesto, 1924, by André Breton, and the Symbolist Manifesto, 1886, by Jean Moreas, clearly articulated the philosophical underpinnings and stylistic goals of their movements. The evolution of early literary movements. The beginning of literary movements, a detailed analysis. Literary movements mark significant shifts in the themes, styles, and purposes of literature throughout history. They arise from social, political, and cultural changes and reflect the evolving perspectives of society. Understanding the beginnings of literary movements requires examining the context, triggers, and influence of key figures and works. 1. Classical period literature began as oral tradition, with early civilizations like the Greeks and Romans formalizing it into genres like epic, tragedy, and comedy. Works like Homer's The Iliad and Sophocles' Oedipus Rex emphasized human fate, morality, and divine intervention. 2. Medieval period literature in the Middle Ages often focused on religion, morality, and chivalry. Works like The Divine Comedy by Dante Alighieri reflected a blend of Christian theology and humanist exploration, paving the way for the Renaissance. Third Renaissance. The Renaissance celebrated the rebirth of classical knowledge and emphasized human potential. Shakespeare, Cervantes, and Petrarch explored universal themes in groundbreaking ways, setting the stage for modern literary exploration. 4. Enlightenment and rationalism. With thinkers like Voltaire, Rousseau, and Locke, literature turned to political ideals, reason, and reform. Satirical works like Swift's Gulliver's Travels critiqued societal flaws while advancing rational thought. Interplay between movements. Interplay between movements. No literary movement exists in isolation. Movements often emerge in response to or as a critique of previous trends. Romanticism challenged the rationalism of the Enlightenment. Modernism questioned Victorian-era realism and embraced fragmentation. Postmodernism rejected modernism's search for absolute truths, emphasizing irony and relativism. This interplay ensures literature remains a living, evolving art form, responding to its time while influencing future generations. Conclusion. The beginnings of literary movements are deeply intertwined with historical, cultural, and philosophical shifts. By responding to and shaping societal changes, these movements enrich the literary canon, offering insights into human thought and creativity across centuries. Understanding these origins provides a deeper appreciation of how literature reflects and shapes the human experience.